We are starting part 3 now, where we are dividing multi-digit numbers with decimals again, only this time we're going to talk about what happens when you have a decimal on both sides of the equation. So just a quick reminder about some vocabulary. We have our divisor, which is what you would find on the outside, and the dividend on the inside. So those are two words that we're going to be referring to. So if you're not sure exactly what they are, make sure that you write that down. So what happens when there are decimals on both the divisor and the dividend? Because we've talked about them if we have them on one or the other, but we haven't talked about it if you have it on both. So that's what we're going to take a look at today.
So, first of all, the number one goal is to always try to get your divisor turned into a whole number. And we'll show you how to do that. There's actually two ways. And the first way is, let's say you have a division problem that's written out this way with the division sign rather than the little house thing.
Right.
And we have 6/100 divided by 2/10. What you can do is think about how earlier when we learned about fractions, we can also have it look like a fraction like this. And it means the same exact thing. You're still dividing by the same numbers. Now, if you make it into a fraction, though, the one thing I do like about this way is it shows you how you can make equivalent fractions. And as you remember, whatever you multiply on the top or the numerator, you have to also divide or multiply with the denominator. So if I did this, multiplied both by 10, then really what that means is I'm just moving that decimal to the right one place value, and now I get a whole number. And this should be much easier to divide now. You
Because
have,
that was part 1, where you got the
yes.
decimal then on the inside only.
So now you're ready to go. So that is one way that you can think of dividing and getting rid of that decimal in the divisor. Now, one thing though that we just do want to point out is, okay, so now instead of 2/10, I'm dividing by 2/100.
Right.
What am I going to do that time? Well, same thing. You can still make it into a fraction here, but one thing that we just want you to see here is, let's say, okay, yep, I just know to always multiply by 10. I'm good to go. Well, let's see here. If I just shift that decimal one place value,
Not so much.
now is my divisor a whole number?
It is not.
No.
Still a decimal.
Yeah. So, what are we going to do? It's definitely not going to work this way. So, sometimes we can't just always multiply by 10. We sometimes might need to multiply by 100, and that's okay. What you're doing then is you are just shifting this decimal again. Instead of one place, now two places to get that whole number. And then you're good to go. 6 divided by 2, as you all know, your answer would be 3, and you're good to go.
So that's the first way, if where you can turn it into a fraction. But for some people that might be confusing, have to turn it into a fraction, then multiply the equivalent. There's another way that might work easier for you. So here's the example. We have 12 and 64/100 divided by 2/10. So you can see there's a decimal on both sides. But in this case, the first step is just simply shifting. So if I have one place after the decimal here, I would shift my decimal 1, but you also need to do that on the other side of the division sign too, which essentially means you're just multiplying both numbers by 10, just like we did in the last one. This is just another way to see it, is you're just shifting on both sides at the same time, so like both of them move. Then once you've moved it, then you've got your whole number here on the outside, and you can solve that. So I'm not going to go through all these little steps necessarily, but you can see if you've got them, you move it, and then you've got a problem that you already know how to solve. So that is the second way, and this is just another way to see you could do it either way. So in this case, this little example shows that the decimal was moved twice, so the decimal was moved twice. But then you can also see over here, like in the first method, they set it up like a fraction and then multiplied them both by 100 and got the same exact thing. So there's two ways to do it. Whichever way makes more sense to you, that's what you should pick. So again, that's just repeating what that said.
All right, so now that you've seen a couple different ways to do it, we want you to pause and try this problem. Do your best with it. We'll walk you through it in a moment, but work on it first. All right. So, first of all, I guess I should have given you this hint beforehand. Just a reminder that there is a decimal and a whole number. We usually just don't put it there
Right.
unless we actually need to work with it. So the decimal should be after the 32. Really, it's saying 32 divided by 400ths. And like we always said before, the first goal is to get rid of the decimal and the divisor here. It'll just be easier to deal with. So hopefully you remembered to move your decimal 2 places. So now you're really dealing with 4 instead of 400ths. And when you do that, if you're swooping here, you got to swoop over here as well. So now we're going to swoop 2 places. And hopefully you remembered too that when you swoop over, you want zeros as placeholders.
Yeah.
So now really you're dealing with 3,200 divided by 4.
Right.
And
Which
that
is-
should be much easier to deal with. Now you just have to plug in your numbers. 32 divided by 4 equals 8. Then you go through the steps. 8 times 4 equals 32. 32 minus 32 is 0. And now the tricky part is just keeping track of those zeros. Here you have a 0, so now you're really...
And I don't know if you found this, a lot of kids will, once they get 0 down there, they think they don't have to keep going.
Right.
But the answer's not just 8. There's still those 2 zeros right there that you have to account for. So you do have to go through the whole process, even if 4 into 0 is 0 times.
Right.
You still have to go through that.
Exactly. Because, 8 times 4 doesn't equal 3,200. It only equals 32.
Right.
So we have another 0 here. Going through the same steps. 0 times 4 equals 0. I know it seems silly, but at least you're making sure you're remembering all those
Right.
zeros. So once again, you bring down the other 0, and you still have to divide this to get another 0 here. Oh, shoot.
Nope, you're fine. You're fine.
So anyway.
It was
the
800. You could have put a decimal at the very end of it, but like Mrs. Van Dam mentioned before, whole numbers have a decimal, but a lot of times we don't put it.
Yes.
So,
anyway, you should have had 800 there. Jumped right up. So now that we've done one together, we just want you to try 2 more, dealing with the decimals both in the dividend and the divisor. They're written 2 different ways, so think about how you can set it up to make more sense for you, whatever works best for you, and just bring those back ready to go for the next day to work with your group. Good luck.